The original hem, I'm not really not a fan of original hem
Okay.
because I feel uh, it's also difficult to lengthen later if he has a growth spurt or whatever. And it's a lot of work for really no extra joy in this life. But anyway, yeah, some clients just want that original hem
Like that.
up there.
Mhm.
Fine. So I'll start by just marking out from the stitch line 1 centimeter. That's going to be my seam allowance. And usually if I do an alteration, I won't repeat an error. So you see this is a little bit curved here. So generally in an alteration, I would straighten that. But because I'm now using this original here, I'm going to remain with the curve. So I want to see now this guy, okay, I'm less or shortening 8.5. So at the end of the day, the new hem must stop here at 8.5 centimeters. So now each one of these is a little bit different. I'm going to check this one from where I'm going to cut to the edge. It's 3.5 centimeters. So I'll measure that up there. There's 3.5. And then I need 2 of these 1 centimeter seam allowances. So I'm coming 2 down. So at the end of the day, this is where I'm going to cut. And I'll just measure this from the bottom, 10 centimeters. And this I'll do straight, which you can see I can already see with my eyes. It's not as straight. Well, how is that? No, that's actually fine. So I'll cut here, and then I'll cut here, and check that. No, first I'll double check.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I'll
So he wants it 8.5 centimeters shorter.
yeah.
Right. Okay. You've taken it up 1 centimeter. So that's your cutting line.
Yeah. So first I'm going to cut off there with the 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I will end up unpicking this as well. I don't keep this original. So cut this off. There's a lot of easier ways to do this, but all of the ways I find like just too bulky and not neat. So I have my own very extra version of extraness.
So from below that length where they want, how much have you got? 4, 5.
So yeah, so here's the new length that he wants, this 8.5. At the end of the day, that's where he wants it to finish there. So then I take this measurement, 3.5, minus 2 centimeter seam allowance, gives us 1.5, up from there. And then I'll just check myself. If I place this here and I stitch it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, will it?
So you use that same base. You use your same base.
Yeah.
Okay.
So each hem is going to be a bit different. So I'm actually going to do another one now. So that's how I'll do that one.
So you'll show me when you stitch that one, right?
Yeah.
So you're just using the same bottom part.
The exact same piece. Because some people want this distress.
Yes.
Which I feel it's a lot of work for really nothing so exciting. Especially because the distress will return, after a few washes. Some designers pre-distress their denim, which I think is really nonsense. This like white that you can see coming through. Because that's on the inside of the thread is white. So what you see here is the indigo like scratching off in a way. So some designers do that in advance of selling it to you.
So you cut that piece off.
So I'm cutting that off. Let's do my maths first. Okay, so this one we're lessing 4.5 at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, he wants it 4.5 centimeters shorter. 4.5. So that's where he needs it.
So you'll go 1 up.
Well, now I'm going to check this one. So this is, let's call it 2.25 from the edge to where I'm going to cut. So 2.25 up, and then 2 centimeters or 2 seam allowances down.
So you're just adding that extra piece and then.
Yeah. So this is actually going to be basically 1/4 less than 4.5.
Okay, I'll show you what I do when I so that I get this small same thing. I just make a pleat.
Yeah. So
But
that,
it's not, doesn't look very nice.
yeah, I feel it's very bulky, especially like here on the
Sides.
seams, yeah.
You're cutting up.
Yeah. So first I'll cut this one because I always double check myself.
See that mats I have to wrap around my head. I have to go and do it.
That's also why I always double check because the regular mats is very easy.
Yeah. But like this, okay, you've cut out, so that's your 2 centimeter hem already.
Yeah.
And then you
So I've got the 1 centimeter hem on this side, and I need
Yeah,
1 centimeter on this
that
side.
side. And then you've got your extra. I'll go to the other side.
Then I always just double check myself.
How do you do that?
So here, this, if I remember now, this was the 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's my 4.5 where I want my hem to be at the end of the day. If I place this,
There.
oh no, the cut line is actually 1/4 centimeter above that.
Okay.
So if I place my hem there,
Mm-hmm.
and I stitch it at 1 centimeter seam allowance,
And then do you overlap that?
I'll overlock one edge, and I come down, not quite, but the 1 centimeter will be inside that seam once I unpick it. Yeah, and that will fold down, yeah, to where I want it to be.
When you're done with it, please show me. Right?
I'll show you step by step. So yeah, at the moment I'm just going to cut whatever this is, 3 centimeters.
With the quarter above.
With that quarter above.
Okay.
And then I'll be unpicking that. And then I'll start the joining situation. Right, so there we've cut it off. And I give this an overlock. And this we cut off exactly the 1 centimeter away from the stitch line. And I've unpicked that stitching. So what's left to do is double check what our measurements are like. You know, sometimes it's a bit of a bell bottom or a boot leg. I think it's going to be fine. You know, if it is a bit of a shape like that, you need to get in here and adjust this so that it will fit nicely on the leg. If not, and we're safe like that, then we can stitch this onto the, the denim. Let's see I've got the right one. Yes. So here we're going to stitch roughly 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm just going to make sure that the seams are as exact as humanly possible. Yeah. Because here we want it to be, original. That's why it's called the original hem. So you don't all of a sudden seem to be skew. So I'm going to stitch, and you see here we measured now from the stitch line up 1 centimeter. I'm going to stitch right next door to that stitch line. Call it 1 mil, maybe 1.5 mils from the stitch line. Not over, in other words, not into the hem. See, here's the original stitch line. I don't want to go further into the hem. I want to come out basically in this crease, just not quite as far as that crease. Maybe midway between the stitch line and the crease. How I usually do is I put one side of my foot, of the machine foot, over that stitch line, and then stitch along like that, because that lets me stitch right next door. And I do just want just that tiny bit of extra, because I don't want to stitch exactly on the stitch line, because that will mean that when I redo this, the stitch line is in a ditch. and then you don't really see the top stitch at all, which kind of defeats the whole point. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch that. And as you can see, the one side is overlocked, the side on the pants is overlocked, the side on the hem is not overlocked. So I'm just going to stitch all of that. Now, the other one, it's exactly the same. Exactly the same story. Overlocked, stitch. The only difference is what we need to do with these measures when we cut, because this hem, as you see, much shorter, much narrower than this hem. So each one is going to be different according to what is the original measurement of the hem. Now, as you can see here, I've lined up my edges there and I've stitched right next door. 1.5 mils. Here's my original stitch line, and here's where I stitched. So just next door, you put the edge of the machine foot there, the middle of the one end of the machine foot there, and you'll be stitching about 2 mils away. 2 mils is a little bit too much. 1.5 mils is fine. Once that's stitched, I like to overlock this edge here. I can, of course, overlock it from the beginning one time when I overlock this edge, but I tend to get confused about which edge I need to overlock, and I don't want to overlock both. I suppose no one will die if I overlock both. But anyway, in any event, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, this seam is going to be loose or out, so I need to overlock this. Then we can go and open the seam, nice and neat and flat. So now I can say like this, it is possible you can have all of this down and tuck it all into the seam and stitch like that. That for me here, super bulky, so I don't like to do that. The other option would be, open this up and keep that portion in. Again, very bulky here, but at least a bit better. But obviously I do the most PeZulu level, which is to open this up so this is nice and flat. Then we'll restitch this original top stitch, and this portion will just catch by hand so it doesn't flap about. And that, I feel, gives us a nice, smooth, neat original hem without all of that bulky mess. There you go, Bafundi. A nice, flat, fashionable, original hem without all of that crazy bulk doing crazy things. So this hand stitch here, same rules as with a suit trouser. You don't want it to be so small that your toe can catch in there, but you don't have to make it so incredibly tiny because it's quite a bulky fabric. And I used a double cotton because, again, heavy fabric. And here you can, you don't have to catch just like one thread like you usually do on a trouser. Because it's such a bulky fabric, you can really catch quite a bit. So make sure that this is nice and strong. And that is that. Let's really just look at those numbers again. So this hem, it's less 8.5, meaning from the end here, at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, it needs to be 8.5 centimeters shorter. So that needs to be then the end of the hem, 8.5. It's going to be then the final length that we return to. Now my ruler's gone walking, so I'm just going to use this. So there is going to be my new hem line. Step one, step whatever, like determine how short you want it. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut, or at this stage mark, doesn't really matter, 1 centimeter above the stitch line of the hem. So every hem is going to be a little bit different depending on how broad this hem is in the original. Now you can also measure this. So see, that's 3 centimeters from the hem to this cut line. So what you do here, this is now your final. You're going to measure 3 up. In other words, the same length as this. and we're going to add 2 seam allowances. So 2 of this 1 centimeter is 2 centimeters. Of course, yeah. And there it is. And you can measure this up now if you like, because that will let you, cut it easier. So at the end of the day, this is then your cut mark, because then you're going to put this seam up there, and it's going to fall down and come back to this line. And you can always check that if you need. So how I often do is I'll first cut this. Cut this hem out. Going around. And then using these measures, I'll check. So at the end of the day, I want it to be this long. I'm going to cut it here. Then I'm going to place this. And I'm going to stitch at 1 centimeter, which is like just underneath. Oh, sorry, I'm going to place this there on the cut mark. And this is now going to be, so here, placing it on the cut mark, and it's going to be just underneath the stitch line. This is going to fall down, and you see there it comes to the line that I want. So I know I did my maths correctly. I have to run this whole business, so sometimes I can get a little bit flustered and distracted. And so 6.5, and that was 3, 7, 8, 9.5 makes sense. You can always double check yourself with maths. So 6.5 from the edge. And as you know, in this case, I like to do things straight. Making sure this is all lying nice and flat. Put a pin here just so that it doesn't flap about too much. And this is 6.5 from that edge. 6.5, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, makes sense. So cutting here. And as you know, I always like to cut that little 1/4 centimeter less. So now I know this was 6.5, this was 3, so that's 9.5 that I'm going to cut. So this one I can do one time. Yeah, that's fine. And again, just go around, cut that seam allowance off. So what's it, 9.5? 9.5. And I can always just double check myself. I want it to be 8.5 less. This whole thing is 3.5, is 3 centimeters. 2 centimeters down, there it is. If I stitch it there, if I match it there and stitch it, then when it folds down, it will be at that 8.5. So I hope all of that is making sense. But at the end of the day, as you see, that's always how I check myself. I mark where I want the new hem to be and just check, okay, if I cut it here and then stitch it there, will it give me what I want at the end of the day? Of course, also this one, cutting that 1 centimeter above the stitch line. Yeah, that is how the fashion happens. Suppose if you see, I really want to tuck the seam allowance into the hem. If you didn't want to do that, you could just stitch overlock, stitch right in the ditch, overlock there, and then just leave that flapping about in the wind. But yeah, as you know, I find that too bulky.